Welcome. You're tuned into The Current. My name is Erin Curran, and this is a show about life change, shifting perspective, sparking curiosity, and getting to know some new people. Like today, our guest is BESS WELDEN. She's a local performer, playwright, and theater educator in Maine. I say local, but it's really statewide. And
Guess so. Well, yeah.
Welcome.
The central to southern Maine. I don't think I can really claim like the county or anything like that. But
It's a big state.
it's a big state.
Welcome, Bess.
Thank you. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me.
My pleasure. I'm just delighted to learn more about current theater projects that you've been doing, what your life is like, and finding balance between work and creativity and play and all those things. So we're going to touch on a lot of things in the show today.
Great.
For starters, I'd love to know more about how you found, I know that you're a theater person, like you're involved in lots of different elements and aspects of production and performance.
Yeah, I guess I'm what people call now a multi-hyphenate.
Oh,
Right?
multi-hyphenate. I get it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get it. Yeah.
Yes, I am I guess I'm in a lot of ways a pretty comprehensive theater artist, although that's not entirely fair to say because I'm not a designer.
Yes.
Although I do think pretty visually.
Yeah.
But there are whole aspects to design and technical theater that I have no expertise in at all. Okay. But I love collaborating with those people because then they help the things that I make live in a visual way, which of course with theater is pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Have you always been interested in theater and getting and becoming more involved in the production and the performance, or were you?
Well, I mean, I think everybody has their sort of like origin story, that your family or your parents tell you about like what you were like when you were a kid.
Yeah.
But I think I've just always been interested in live performance. Theater in particular. Yeah. My mom always tells a story about taking me to visit my grandfather who was living in New York City when I was very small. And I think I was only about 2 or 2.5, and they took me to Story Theater, which was sort of like a big thing in New York in the early 70s. Uh-huh. And apparently I just sat completely transfixed through the entire thing. And, it was sort of like a moment where somebody observed, maybe it was just my mom watching me, just sort of kind of going like, oh, I think there's something going on there.
Yeah.
And I was like really lucky as a kid growing up. I grew up in northeastern Ohio, so nowhere near where we are right now. My family was always super supportive of my interest in theater, even when it became clear like that was something that I wanted to do like for my life.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of theater artists in general, creative people who don't necessarily have that initial sort of foundational support from family. So that was a big privilege that I, still really, feel fortunate and grateful for. Yeah. And so even from some really, really early on, so like a lot of kids, of course, kids are all about play and make believe and story and embodying story. And I think that's true for like almost everybody. Yeah. But I think I had sort of a particular, maybe outsized interest in that. So like I was like everybody, we were like making up plays in the basement and, there would be family gatherings or holidays and there was always a show and I always had to decide, I guess even then I was sort of like directing what the show would be, but then also starring in the show, of course, and, recruiting my friends to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But then I got really started to get involved. There were things in school, of course, and thankfully, there are still a few things in school where we embed the idea that we can we can use what theater offers us in terms of bringing story to life as a way of learning about something, which I think to me is sort of core to what I do and what I'm interested in terms of what I make. But then I think after that, where I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, there was a very active children's theater. And, my mom saw that this was something that was an interest of mine. But I remember her saying, I don't want you to go to try out or audition for a play until you're a very, very strong reader. I think that's very important. So I was like, okay, because what did I know? So it wasn't until I was in like 4th grade that she was sort of like, now I'm ready to take you to see, and then that was it, because I got a great part, and then I was just sort of off.
Yeah.
And so I had that, growing up through, elementary school, middle school, the opportunity to interface with my community, like through theater. So there was the children's theater, and then my high school was so small we didn't even have a theater program. So like community theater became the place where I was like learning and growing. And of course, what's great about community theater is that it tends to be multi-generational.
I was just going to say.
So it was like this great way to be connecting with not just my peers or people my own age, but there were people of all ages and from lots of different towns and areas that I got to know. And when I reflect on that, like in a way, it was sort of like, oh, what a bummer that my school doesn't even have a theater program. But then like that made me have to kind of get involved in theater in a broader way.
Yeah,
and then of course there was some university theater around where I grew up, and was able to kind of, start to dip my toe into some of that stuff before I went off to college. So even before I went to college, like this was a big part of who I was in my life, but I was very much focused on being an actor. Like performance was what I was interested in, and I loved to dance, and I liked to sing, and I took voice lessons, and sort of musical theater was a big big desire, something that I spent a bunch of time doing.
So when do you think the shift occurred for you that you actually could use theater as a way to tell a more personal story, or to communicate something you didn't see being told out there? And kind of make it your own?
It took a while. Because when I got to college, for about 10 minutes, I had said, like, there's no way I'm going to major in theater. Of course, that's not practical. I need to be thinking about, and then I auditioned for that first acting class, and I got in, and I was like, who am I kidding? But I did actually do a double major. So I also did, I have a bachelor's degree in theater, but also in Judaic and Near Eastern studies.
Oh, interesting.
Which is also a big part of, growing up Jewish was a big part of my identity, still is a big part of my identity. So like, even while I was sort of like, I'm going to be an actor, I was also still like really curious just about the world. And, and I had a liberal arts education, so I had a chance to like really broaden my thinking, critical thinking, being curious about things beyond just what was happening inside the theater space. And I really value having that as my background too. But then as I became more and more serious about wanting to pursue a career as a performer, it became clear to me that there were skills that I just didn't have, or that I felt like I really needed to hone before I felt like I could be competitive. And so then I decided to go to graduate school. And so I auditioned for acting programs, and then did a 3-year Master's of Fine Arts in Acting. So that's like really where it all of it started, from sort of this place of like wanting the desire to be a performer and be like an interpretive artist, right? Like to like take existing text and character and really investigate that and breathe life into it. And it wasn't really until I was in graduate school that my mind was sort of opened to the idea of creating my own work. And it was really because I had this terrific movement teacher who did a lot of solo performance, physical theater performance. And he sort of embedded that idea in everything that we were doing, even within those first couple of years of school, this idea of like, well, what does it mean to have agency as an artist? And what does it mean to like say like, oh, I have a voice, I have ideas, I have something that I personally want to say or connect with about what's going on in my community, my world. And it really wasn't until then that I was sort of like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's a possibility. And then while I was in graduate school too, like in lieu of a thesis, we were required to make basically a solo performance piece based on something from Shakespeare. That was like a very broad prompt, right? And I chose to create this piece starting from Shylock and the Merchant of Venice, and sort of exploring some around this sort of really like the most famous sort of villainous Jewish character in Shakespeare's canon. But I went like way out there with it, you know, using like mask work and movement work and incorporating music, and it just sort of opened up this whole sort of like, oh, maybe I am someone who can have a vision around even taking something like a classic text and then make it make it have meaning for me as a, well, then 20th century person.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't even the 21st century yet. So it was in graduate school where those seeds started to get planted, and that I was really sort of supported and nurtured to start thinking about like, oh, well, maybe I don't have to follow like, this is the way you become an actor. Because, well, of course, there are lots of ways that happens. There's no ladder to climb, really. But it was while I went to grad school in Denver, where those seeds of like becoming a generative artist, as I like to say, that's where those seeds really started.
Yeah, and now I know that you've done a lot of different projects in the interim, both as a sort of performer only and as a author, performer kind of combo. Now it's kind of almost come full circle because you're also a theater educator, and you're like passing this on to the next generation and empowering new voices. And I definitely want to talk about that as well, like what that experience is like for you. Of all the many projects, and we'll put a link to your website so folks can see what you're currently involved in, and maybe look a little bit if you have archives of past shows and stuff on your website.
There's even some video people can check out.
Cool. We'll definitely put a link to that below this video. I wondered if there was one project in particular that you'd like to talk about, or that either provided an opportunity for you to have a new shift your perspective, or experience like an aha moment. Anything like that come to mind when you think about the projects, or like all of them?
All of them.
Yeah, right.
Right. Well, I don't know. Somebody famous says like, I'm always in love with the thing that I'm working on right now the most. But that's not necessarily true. But I guess what I'll talk about, because it is like very much on my mind right now. So theater education has been a big part of what, actually a big part of my life, even from fairly early on. Like I started teaching at the college level back in '97, I think, and I've been doing it on and off, but mostly on since then, and that was before I even lived in Maine. Yeah,
so from your late 20s?
Yeah, from my late 20s, like all the way through.
Yeah.
And really understanding how like my teaching practice is like an integral part of my entire creative practice has been an important discovery for me over this lengthy period of time that I've been doing that. And so I think when I initially started, like for a lot of artists, it's sort of like, well, this is a good day job, right? Because it's sort of like, well, I have some skills, I can pass them along and it helps to pay the bills, as opposed to having some other kind of day job that, most artists have to have, unless you are in this like tiny group of people who don't actually have to have a life to earn money outside of their creative work.
Right.
So anyway, there's that piece. But the other thing that's shifted a lot for me too, so like my teaching, I feel like my teaching path has grown and changed over time. My playmaking craft has also changed and morphed over time. And one of the biggest changes has really happened just within the last maybe handful of years, where I really started writing plays because I wanted to have material to perform myself that meant something to me, that felt grounded in something larger than myself, that was a way of really connecting with big ideas, questions, even difficult things, and use theater as a way of starting conversation with people. So that's how I started, sort of like generating work because I wanted to keep working as a performer and not like wait around for somebody else to give me a job.
Right.
But over the last, half a dozen years or so, I've also started to write material not for me. So I'm writing like multi-character plays for other people to perform, and have really stepped into the role of playwright in a way that I'm not sure I ever would have anticipated. And being a playwright, sort of coming from an acting background, gives me a particular kind of perspective on crafting things on the page. And there are a lot of people who come, I think a lot of people start their passion with theater as performers because I think that's our natural connection, and then they discover, oh, actually I'm a vision person, so I'm a director, or actually I'm a
storyteller,
whatever it is. So this is I'm getting there. I promise I'm getting there. So the project that's like in my mind specifically right now is a play that I wrote over the course of about 3 years. I mean, it took about 3 years to develop, called Refuge Malja. And Malja is the Arabic word for refuge. So the title's really sort of like refuge, but it's in English and it's in Arabic.
Yeah.
And that is a play that I developed first as a new play, as a short play, that I started to do some developmental work with the Maine Playwrights Festival, which is something that great thing for people to know about because it's based, Acorn Productions, which is now actually based in South Portland, does this annual festival to develop short new plays by Maine writers, and it's exclusive to Maine writers.
Yeah. So it's a great opportunity.
It's a great opportunity, if especially like if you just like if you have an initial idea for something, you're just playing around with it. And they only work on plays that are from 8 to 30 minutes long. So it's not even like like if you have a full length play, forget it. This is not your thing.
Right.
But the idea is that it's supposed to really be there to support a playwright through a process, and to so that you can submit work, and then the whole idea is that you're supported to revise your work and get feedback and understand how to make it better with the help of dramaturg, director, actors, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So this play, Refuge Malja, which at the time was called Whatever You Decide, that was the original title, was a short play. I think it was about 30 minutes long, and it just was something that came to me very, very quickly. So back in the fall of 2015, I was really hooked into following what was happening with the refugee crisis in Europe.
Yes.
And seeing all, just like so many of us were, like just those, literally waves of people on waves making these crazily perilous, dangerous journeys from Middle East, North Africa, fleeing war, just trying to find safety.
Right.
And my sister-in-law, Jody Hilton, is a photojournalist, and she's been based in Europe for a long time, probably a decade or so. And she was specifically covering Lesbos, the Isle of Lesbos, where a lot of people were arriving to try to enter through Greece. And so I was like very keyed into watching, looking at her work, and she was publishing for the New York Times and the Guardian and a lot of stuff online, and I was just very, very hooked into the humanity of the story, or wanting to find a way to find a connection to the humanity of the story, because when it starts to be these huge numbers, thousands, millions of people, it can feel very separate. Yeah. And it's happening over there. Right. It's not happening here.
Right.
And I've always found her work really inspiring because she's so skilled and brings so much artistry to the journalism that it's hard not to look at these images of people. And when I look at an image, my brain goes immediately to what's the story.
What's the story? And we'll put a link to some of her work too, so for viewers can see that
great.
as well.
That's great. And she's really dedicated a lot of her career for the last at least, I don't even know how many years, really to refugee stories. Yeah. So that's a big part of what she does. Anyway, so I was looking at all of this stuff, I was reading all of these articles, seeing some video, and noticing that there was this big trend about unaccompanied minors making this trip. So basically, kids who are on their own taking these life-threatening journeys, and asking myself, I'm a parent, I have 2 children, trying to put myself in the place of a parent who would sort of be in that unbelievably almost impossible to imagine. I mean, I think still impossible to imagine a place where you're it is so dangerous where we are that it's actually less dangerous for me to try to send my child across a body of water in the hope that they will land and be able to start their life over again. So that sort of heart-wrenching idea that seems unfathomable to me. And then also the stories of families sort of being separated from each other because there's so much chaos in terms of what happens to folks if they do actually make this journey, and then once they land, what happens. And things were unfolding so quickly, and borders being closed and then shifting, and then people being able to stay and then being able to force back. So anyway, I got very keyed into this idea of a story about an American photojournalist, and in particular a Jewish American photojournalist, and what would happen if she met a kid who, under whatever my invented circumstances, had been separated from his family, from his mother, and for whatever reason, even though she's like this war photographer who's seen everything, there's something about this kid that kind of brings all the walls down. And she becomes very connected to and wants to try to really help this kid in a way that goes beyond what would be professional, let's say. And that was sort of the starting point for this particular story. So and I was, there were so many things that then spilled out from there in terms of like all of the connections and cycles of history, and sort of like watching these people on boats and knowing the history, of Jews who were fleeing from the Holocaust in boats that were turned away from other places, and sort of looking at these like cycles of migration and how that really is sort of something that connects all of humanity. And particularly in this case, like maybe two people that would feel like they were very separate from each other, or from very, very different worlds, different religious backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. And then there's a lot more. There are other characters that come into the story. But that's a play that started as a short play, had a little chance to be developed, and then I just got really, I got excited about it in a deep way, because I also knew from the beginning that I wanted a lot of the play to be in Arabic. And language, and the barrier of language, and how she as a photographer uses photography to sort of bridge this communication divide between her and this kid. And so how they communicate basically by taking pictures and teaching each other language. So I don't speak Arabic. I mean, I've spent some time in the Middle East, but I am not an Arabic speaker at all. So I also knew that this project was going to put me on the hook to make connections inside of our community, where we have all of these incredible people here who are coming from all over the world, and obviously huge groups of people who are native Arabic speakers coming from, a lot of places, but Iraq in particular. And so it really forced me to have to reach out and make connections to people that I otherwise probably wouldn't have come into contact with. And so I through actually Portland Public Schools, he was working as a translator for the school department at the time. I met Ali Al-Mashakil, who actually lives in Biddeford now with his family. And I met him, and he agreed to help me translate the sections of the play that I wanted to be in Arabic, and we've developed a pretty great friendship and collaborative, collegial relationship over the last few years. And then, of course, there have been a lot of other people who have been involved. But that project, because I felt like I had to reach out, was bringing me not only into this sort of global story, but it was sort of bringing me into a local story too, in really interesting sorts of ways. And then also having to reach out to find the actors who could perform in the play, and especially these young actors. And so I was lucky enough to convince Portland Stage Company that maybe that they could help me develop the play into a full-length play. So the answer was like, well, write the whole thing and then we'll see where we are with it. So that's what I did, and then got a lot of support in terms of like readings and development, and trying to find actors who could really help me understand the story. Because when you write a play, you don't just write it once and then like you put it up there and that's it. It can be a very, very long developmental process, and being able to have actors in a room speaking the text, having a director in the room who's helping you understand what the visual life of the play is, having somebody like Ali as a translator and also a cultural broker in the room to be able to help all of us understand more about what we were trying to step into, which is so different from where we are, but also a lot the same, of course.
I'm struck by how much education is a natural part. I mean, there's so much learning happening in this collaboration, not only for you, but like for everyone in the room, and just like how that community and collaboration that started way back for you, not having the high school theater department, like is like coming like, and then here it is again, and here it is, and bringing people together who wouldn't know each other otherwise, and just what a beautiful opportunity that is to cultivate friendships and connect, like for a common goal of getting this story to view to in the theater. So it was. So we, fast forwarding a little bit,
last fall, a little bit less than a year ago, hi Dee, Portland Stage, and then Portland Stage decided to do a fully produced main stage production of the play, which for people who aren't in sort of like the theater world, like that's cool, like that sounds good, right?
Yeah.
And it is really good, but it's like an unbelievable opportunity. You know, there are, you know, thousands of playwrights all across the country who would like, you know, I don't know what they would do to be able to have the opportunity to have their work done at Portland Stage. Portland Stage is, you know, it's been, you know, I was there last night. I think this is the start of the 46th season.
Wow.
And Portland Stage has a national reputation. So it was a huge opportunity, not just for me and my development as a writer, but like just for the story and for it to be sort of so deeply connected to our community because we had to do the outreach to find these young actors. So there is this boy who's supposed to be somewhere between 11 and 14 years old. So young and vulnerable, not somebody who looks like a young man who could take care of himself. And what we decided to do was actually have 3 boys share the role because in a professional production, you're doing 8 shows a week. And then, you know, it's a lot to ask a young person to do on top of school and rehearsal and all of that. So we decided we would try to find 3 young actors to share the part. And we did. And it took an incredible amount of work and help from teachers throughout Portland Public Schools and Ali helping us connect to people in the community. And we found these 3 very, very different boys. I want to say young men, but they were really boys. Just being able to have them become part of our collaborative team, having them be in the theater for the first time, having the opportunity to like be able to meet with their families and explain what this like project is like, because for them theater was not part of necessarily their growing up. I think all of them were born outside of the United States and were first generation immigrants themselves. So like so there were just so like the connections just kept weaving and you know, the professional actors, there are 3 adult actors, all of whom we cast, well, that's not true. I was going to say all of whom we cast out of New York. There were 2 actors from New York and 1 actor from Chicago who were the core professional actors, and then the boys. And every time the boys, it would be a time for the boys to come in for rehearsal, the whole room just changed because there was just this like, this incredible, just sort of like we just got infused with this energy. And these kids who aren't actors, right? I mean, they're not child actors, they're not trained, they're just coming in and finding a way to connect with this character and speaking their native language. They all needed to be Arabic speakers in order to do it. And what that meant for the rest of us who were then actually really learning from them. So like, you know, in a couple of days of rehearsal in the afternoons, all we did was we just sat in a circle and we basically had sort of like Arabic lessons. But then like bridging the gap between certain dialects, like there was just so much learning going on.
Beautiful.
For all of us, and not just the kids, the adults were really learning a whole lot too. And I think like even Portland Stage as a company was learning about like, how do we do this kind of work? How do we do work that really is inviting new neighbors, new members of our community into our walls and opening up our eyes to different modes of thinking and different ways of making and, you know, different senses even of time or like how we connect with each other.
Yeah, beautiful. And you must be so proud that you were like, you know, the catalyst for this.
I am really proud of that.
I'm so glad we're talking about it on The Current today, because it's like, it's close to your heart and it brought so much goodness to the world and so much, like you said, dialogue and learning for the adults. And I'm a huge fan of continuing education for adults. I think so often in our culture we put the emphasis on kids and like we give them all these classes and opportunities, and then as adults we just kind of sit back and go on our phones
and think we're done. Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm passionate about, as you know, because you've been a student of mine, is Nia. And I'm making a bridge into our movement segue because I'm feeling a little stiff. I'm shifting in my seat, and I think that anyone after, you know, you've been sitting for 20 minutes, half hour, it's just good to get up and stretch and move around. And it is on this theme of continuing education, because I think for me, Nia is just a beautiful way to stay open to learning new moves and and learning things about my body today that were different than yesterday and all those things. And so what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to pick a card if you're game.
Yeah.
And I know it was an abrupt transition, but we'll come back to your...
It's okay. It's all about like, it's all about embodied learning, right? Because that's what theater is. Like it's about body and voice and connecting what we bring of ourselves. So I don't think it's so an abrupt transition. Okay.
Wonderful. So pick
I'll
a
close
card.
my eyes.
Sure.
I'll close my eyes.
Could be any of the move.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
What are they? Oh,
It's punches.
Which is one of my favorite parts of Nia.
Excellent. It comes from the martial arts influence of Taekwondo.
Yeah, like if you were gonna ask me, like if you had asked me, like what would you want to do? I would have said like the martial arts part.
Yeah,
okay.
Cool. Well, what kind of punch did we get? This looks like outward punch. So let's stand up, and I'd invite anyone at home watching or at your computer desk to stand up. Maybe Dee will get up too, we'll see. So there's actually, there's different types of punches in Nia, as you may know. There's outward, there's upward, there's downward, and there's across. So we're gonna focus on outward punch today, because that's the card that Bess drew. So, to prepare for punches, it's nice to widen your stance so that you sense the stability on both sides equally. Stable base is important. We usually do this in Nia barefoot, but if you're wearing shoes, just see if you can sense the soles of your feet in your shoes. So as you do punches, push it with your feet, stay agile, and engage the core of your body. You may think the punch is just all up here. It's actually coming from the base, feeling the power in the core, and then the final movement is the punch. Ready position is how we start, elbows back. Form a loose fist, maybe with a robin's egg inside, I like to say, so it's not tightly closed, but it's a loose fist. And keeping your elbows drawn back and your palms facing up. Keep your lower jaw relaxed. See if you can let your jaw just be relaxed and loosen a little bit your focus so you have a little more of a focus all around. To do outward punch, simultaneously bring one fist and forearm straight out to the front of the body while the other elbow and forearm draws back to maintain vertical alignment. So ready position and then out, outward punch, beautiful, and then out. And the opposite elbow is drawing back. And I love that this is a dynamic, both arms are dynamic and engaged. So it's feeling that core and then using the breath to exhale and sense the power and engagement of the core as you punch. And I like to look and say, look at your target. Where is your target? Have it be below your chin and directly in front of you for outward punch. Yeah. And you can even keep a soft elbow so that your elbow doesn't lock out here, because that would be a point of weakness. You want to keep a strong, locked, a soft elbow rather, so that you have that dynamic. And then as you get into it, you can begin to use the legs more and make it more of a dynamic movement. Nice. And what do you love about punches, Bess?
It really, there is a sense, well, also I think especially like connecting with breath and voice, that moment, like there is that sense of sort of power in it, like really, and also like there's something, I mean, I'm not a fan of violence in any way, but the idea of being able to think about something that you want to move away from, or that you want to move away from yourself.
Right.
You know, sort of like energetically, sort of like, that's not something I need anymore. I can just like, I can make a pathway through that.
And there's something so satisfying about having a target and meeting the target.
Yeah.
And again, it's not about violence, but it's like about impact and like, yes, that's the place, you know, and I'm making contact, even if it's just using my imagination energetically with that point. And it feels powerful and precise, just like you said. Yeah, so that's, like I said, one of the Taekwondo influences, the punches, and they're upward punch, downward punch, and across. When all of those have different benefits. The outward punch, you know, the three body weights aligned, there's engagement of the legs, the core, and of course the arms. So it's really a full body workout, even though you'd think like, oh, it's just with my arm. That's sort of, when you learn more about the technique, you learn more about what goes into it. So thanks for doing that with me.
Oh, sure.
Bess. and for being a NIA student. And you know, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to say about NIA, or like what you've benefited from in a NIA class briefly.
Sure. Well, I was like a more dedicated NIA student a bunch of years ago, and I've become a more intermittent NIA student over the last several years. But I think the thing that does keep me coming back when I make space and time for it, and whenever I do, I always feel like, why am I not doing this more? Which is how we feel about a lot of things, I think. For me, it's like that fusion of dance and martial arts and yoga, all of the elements that sort of blend together. But what I appreciated about it the most is that, and especially the way that you frame it and teach it, is that it's ultimately about like, what is my experience of it, and that my experience of it is exactly what it needs to be. So it's not about like, I'm stressing out because I'm not getting the choreography right, or today, like on this particular day, like whatever's going on in my body there might be a limitation, so it's a chance to notice that, or oh, here's a day where I really feel like this is energizing me, or like, wow, I feel totally exhausted after this experience. Like, it's just, it feels like a holistic way of like checking in. I mean, also like getting a really great workout, but I also like, I guess in the same way with yoga too, it's like, it's as challenging as you choose to make it. And so there's always that opportunity to sort of like, for me, which is really great to like slow down and check in and say like, oh, what does this need to be for me today? And the music is usually like really fun and shifts the mood, and you know, and I know for you that like NIA is a lot about building community and what the community is in that given class on that given day. Sometimes I come and I really just kind of like want to be in my own world, and there's space for that too. You know, so I think there's so much flexibility around it, but I find it like to be it's like truly an enjoyable way for me to move my body and feel like I'm taking care of my body.
I love what you said about awareness, and thanks for sharing that perspective on NIA, because it's, you know, as a teacher, I have one experience, but it's always nice to hear from students. The thing you said about, you know, really checking in with my body and realizing what I'm carrying unconsciously, or, you know, just having that new awareness awaken. As a performer, I'd imagine this is kind of a part of your daily practice, that you have this awareness, of course, on stage, but also kind of increasingly, you know, you're maybe have a more attunement to face and gesture and what I'm communicating, even out and about in the world, you know, compared to some of us that we could just go, you know, just kind of not be thinking about those things and not conscious of them. And I think about that as a performer, and what, I don't know, I guess there's so many places we can go with the conversation, and also I know our time is limited, so I want to make sure that there's that we keep talking about the things that you want to highlight on the show.
Well, that could take like 5 or 6 hours. So.
And we only have like 15 minutes or so left. So I guess one of the things I do love to talk about on the show is community and showing up and being of service, and how we give back and how we have received. And you've already talked about some of the things that you've received, like the supportive family growing up that encouraged you, and the education and some of the teachers. I wonder today, how do you sense community, and how do you like cultivate that when you feel like it's, I don't know, is it something that's kind of been natural for you, like moving to a new area, or when you first came to Maine, or if you could speak to that, that would be lovely.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a pretty gregarious person. I'm an extrovert, so I get a lot from being in direct communication and connection with people. So, and I think being a theater artist, a theater maker, is all about collaboration and like finding ways to communicate and create these mini communities around individual projects or things that, you know, that I'm working on. So I think that's kind of like embedded in who I am. But I think beyond that, or, you know, in addition to that, how important friends are to me. My husband and I moved here with our 2 really young kids a little over 18 years ago. So in a lot of ways, this is now my home community in a way that I've lived now here in Portland longer than, well, I know we're not in Portland right now, but I have lived in Portland for longer, pretty much as long as I've lived anywhere in my life now. Yeah. And my kids have grown up here. So I think, having a family and having your own children, for me anyway, automatically, just sort of put me in a place of seeking and finding any number of sort of circles of community. Yeah. So, when you have young kids, it's really focused on school and who their friends are, or, when we first arrived in town, I was actually working outside of the house and my husband was staying home with our kids, which was a shift from coming from New York. And he became part of a play group. And to this day, we are still very good friends with many of the adults, and our kids are even still really good friends with a lot of those kids that they sort of grew up with and went to school with, and now they're, most of them are now off in college and beyond and all of that. Yeah. So I think having my own family sort of made it essential in some way to figure out how to have a community. I think, being part of the Jewish community has always been a big part of my life, and I've had to find sort of my own ways into finding places where I feel comfortable with that. Yeah. And then also just thinking about the things that matter to me in terms of community, and then how do I go out of my way to try to connect? Right. So for example, connected to theater work and education work for a long, long time. I was one of the sort of original teaching artists in Portland Stage's Theater for Kids program. And so that program's now been around for 10 years. But a core of that program has been going out into public schools and doing work, particularly in Portland, and to see how diverse that community is, and when we're bringing in children's literature and activating imagination and supporting literacy through theater play, feels super, super connected to what I'm passionate about, but also to actually be able to see the benefit of being able to offer that kind of opportunity for kids who aren't getting that kind of stuff necessarily.
Yeah. You're making a beautiful segue into something that I wanted to ask you about, which is why theater. If someone's out there watching and saying oh, but theater is extra. Theater is extracurricular. It's for, what is the case for theater in education and life and
in the 21st century?
In the 21st century, right.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people talk about this, and I'll mention it too because I think it's actually true. I think live theater, whether you're making it or taking it in as an audience member, which actually you are helping make. Theater doesn't exist without the audience. Right. So the audience is an essential collaborator in anything that's live. It makes us empathetic. Theater is embodied stories. It's stories being told by an actual human being in the same room with you, breathing the same air with you, and bringing words and characters alive in a way that hopefully helps you connect to your own humanity, because you're oh, I can see the struggle that this character is having. Right. I have a direct relationship to that, or to open yourself up to well, that's the kind of person I would never meet in my entire life, but here I am actually having an experience where I'm considering what is similar about us or what is different about us. So I think empathy is huge. Right. And I think in terms of people are talking a lot about how do we heal the divides in our, especially in the current political atmosphere in this country, but a lot of those things have been going on forever. I think theater speaks directly to that, and that there is no substitute for sure, you can go to a movie or TV, and those disciplines are like brilliant at doing certain things that theater just can't do or can't compete with. But nothing replaces being in a room with other people.
You make such a good point about the physical closeness and proximity and energy, that you're actually like breathing the same air, you said. And I think there's something energetic about what's shared in that space that is different than watching a TV show that's been super produced and there's all these effects, or a movie and you're sort of like really like in this zone that's so separate from what's on the screen or even on your device and what's on the screen there. It's this sharing of the air, of the energy, and of like the person, the physical person being there live, like you said. There's something that's never going to be just quite like it is in that moment.
Yeah.
With that audience and that person and those words and that, and I'd say I feel that in improv, but I think this conversation is really opening me up to how that's true in live theater too, in scripted theater.
Oh,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as obvious because, like, let's say, okay, the text is the text that everyone has agreed on and like that this is what we're doing. But moment to moment, those things shift. How each audience responds shifts what the actors are doing in sometimes big or sometimes subtle ways. It changes like what that connection from performer to performer is.
Right.
Like, so it is unique. Like in a world where, so many things are about sort of this like sense of connectivity, and this whole digital, like incredible information that is available to us, like the connectivity and also the distancing that happens when we're just in our own space with our devices. And that theater on some level is asking us to like take a risk and put that aside and be present and be present with other humans, whether it's the human sitting right next to you that you know or you don't know, and then those other humans that are on stage that are telling story, which is like the oldest form of how humans communicate, teach each other, try to make sense of our world, try to answer the big imponderable questions. I mean, this is just sort of who we are. So for me, it's essential.
And you mentioned discomfort, and I have to say on a personal note, like I can be aware of my discomfort sitting watching a show, like not if it's an uncomfortable moment for the actors, but sometimes I just feel uncomfortable watching live theater, and I think that's because of all the things that we've enumerated. Like there's vulnerability, there's the risk, like I don't know what's going to happen, and it's a live show, anything could happen on some level, and so I sort of feel like I'm internalizing that pressure a little bit even as a spectator. But what's beautiful about that discomfort is that it does like kind of give me a new experience to then like have new thoughts and insights about myself and what I'm seeing, and I'm in a new space on the other side of it. And I think being, like they say, life begins outside of our comfort zones. Like if I'm always doing stuff that just is like, I'm safe, I'm like there's nothing that's gonna impede or make me, squirm. It's like, okay, am I really living? I think that's a valid question. Like, am I living if I'm always comfortable?
Yeah. So theater invites change. It might be the tiniest change, but it means that, there's a playwright I really respect who talks about like what an incredible like honor it is that people show up to watch your play. Like they're taking two hours out of their lives to come sit and hear a story, and sometimes not sit. I mean, because there's immersive theater, there's theater that asks you to interact in different ways. I mean, improv certainly sometimes goes to that place, but like that relationship between like making the choice to say, I'm going to take 2 hours out of my very, very busy life to actually just go sit and listen and watch something is kind of a radical act in the world that we currently live in.
Yeah. And we're getting towards the end of the show. Yes, it's like flown by. But I wonder, I want to make sure that there's time, if there's anything that we haven't talked about, or like a parting thought that you'd have for viewers, something that you want to either just mention, or just want to give you the floor for that.
I don't know, so many things. Well, I think going back to this idea of community and connecting with community too, and I think that's part of why embracing my role as a theater educator is an important part of my overall creative practice, that feels very important to me too. So I've been lucky enough to be on the faculty at Colby College this is my 10th year, part-time in the theater and dance department. And being able to spend time with young people who are right on that cusp of really making this transition into adulthood. And most of the students that we have at Colby aren't going to go on to necessarily become professional theater artists or practitioners. But what I love about what we do is that we get into the space and I have the opportunity to hold space and create connections for creativity.
Yeah.
And I think opening up that spark, helping young people, and sometimes I work with like 4-year-olds too, but particularly with this generation, this college age students, helping them to understand how their individual voices and creativity are so needed, and to build the skills that allow them to be confident to take their ideas and be able to voice them into the world far beyond what might happen in a traditional theater space, feels very important to me right now. And very connected in a way that it's not sort of like this esoteric art form, but that it's actually building skills for deep and real communication.
Right, and I think that's critical because it's about communication. And you using the voice, using the body out in the world. Whether it's a speech you're giving or a question you're asking at a conference with a group full of people, it's like when we show up fully and we can embody the message that we're having to relay, that's communicated energetically. And to have a little bit of craft and knowledge behind that just makes it so much more powerful when presented. So it's a service that you're doing to share your skills with the next generation. And for viewers out there who may be thinking geez, I don't know, where would I begin? I'm interested in acting. Maybe I have an idea for a play. Maybe, are there resources that we can direct them to? And
well, I mentioned Acorn Productions already, which is sort of helps, produces the Maine Playwrights Festival. They also often offer, wow, that was a lot of words, also often offer community acting classes for adults, even for absolute beginners. So that's definitely a place to step in, and there's some, teaching faculty that sort of cycles in and out that are bringing in all kinds of interesting experience and perspectives. So that is definitely somewhere where if somebody's just I have to get started, that would be one place you could go.
Great. So we'll link to that as well in the show. Bess, it's been such a fun conversation, flown by. Thank you again for making the time, for coming on the show and talking about your projects and clearly what you're passionate about. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. What a fun opportunity.
Thanks for tuning in for The Current, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.